This episode of the City Manager Unfiltered podcast is sponsored by Holbrook Asphalt. Maintaining your roads is one of the most difficult tasks for any city government. The good news is the secret to making it easier is only 3 letters: HA5. HA5 extends the life of roads and reduces the financial burden on your taxpayers. HA5 is an innovative pavement preservation treatment trusted by over 300 public agencies. It keeps good roads in good condition, reducing repair costs and saving taxpayer dollars. Join the hundreds of other cities making the smart choice. Choose HA5 for longer-lasting roads and a healthier budget. Learn more at holbrookasphalt.com/city. That's holbrookasphalt.com/city. Check the show notes for a link. All right. I'm Joe Turner, and this is the City Manager Unfiltered podcast, a podcast for city managers and other public sector executives. It is the most influential local government podcast in America. And with me today is Andrew Patton. He is the Human Resources Director for Laverne, Tennessee. Andrew, you and I have actually met in person. It's one of the rare instances I've actually got to meet a guest in person, because most of my guests I've just met or know virtually. Welcome to the podcast. Why don't you briefly introduce yourself?
Thanks, Joe. Appreciate you having me. I'm Andrew Patton. I'm the Director of HR, as you said, in the city of Laverne. It's a town just outside of Nashville, population's just over 40,000. Been with the city now I'm in my 4th year, actually. Prior to joining the city, I spent the rest of my working life in the private sector. I was at Amazon on their corporate HR team. And then I had this whole other life, which was 25 years in the music business, running labels and management companies. And that chapter came to an end and the reinvention began. And I found myself making a decision between getting a master's in counseling or a master's in HR. I picked HR, and I do a lot of counseling. So go figure.
How do you go from being in the music industry to working for Amazon in the private sector and then ending up as a human resources director in Laverne? What was that journey like?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I started in radio and television in Indiana and got a call one day from a friend in Nashville asking if I was interested in moving down to work at a major label. And so my wife and I at the time had no children and said, we don't see ourselves living in Indiana forever, so we'll head down to Nashville. And that was 1999. If you think about what the music business looked like in 1999, it's drastically different than today. We were spending a lot of money on marketing. We were making a physical product to sell in physical stores. And by the time I left the music industry in 2015, basically music was free and all the retail stores were closed. And so, that giant change was very, very difficult for most major labels, most artists. And at that time, I was running a management company, and also very difficult if your income is completely based on, what your artists do.
Right.
So definitely felt like it was a time for a change for me. And so I pursued a master's degree. And upon completion of that, I was actually recruited by Amazon through LinkedIn. Now, you hear those stories all the time, but it was literally just a blind inbox message from a recruiter. And I spent over 3 years with the Amazon folks, and I absolutely loved my time there. It was fantastic working for, obviously, a name that everybody knows, largest tech company. I spent time in the fulfillment world, which is literally like Santa's workshop. If you ever get the opportunity to be in a warehouse, it's unbelievable, their operation. And then I made some transitions. I helped them launch a team during COVID, actually right before COVID, called Amazon Community Together. And basically, we took the idea of a light duty associate. Rather than them coming to a fulfillment center, which is very limited on light duty work, we partnered with nonprofits around America where they could go donate hours and do their light duty work there. So we partnered with 800 nonprofits. COVID then hit and all of those places closed, but we had donated over 1 million hours to charity at that point. From there, I helped Amazon transition their investigations team to a centralized team. So if you think of one component that HR does at every company is some form of investigations. And so the idea was if we took local investigations away from site-based HR, it allowed them to focus on engagement more. And so we built a team of centralized investigators, and we all had 25 or 30 cases at any one time, ranging the scope of everything you can imagine from a workforce of 1.4 million that we supported. And that was, again, a fabulous experience for me. And the unique part about working at Amazon is to grow and promote, you have to really be willing to relocate. And at that time, we had 4 children. Many were in high school and finishing, and we really are well planted here in the Nashville metro market and wanted to stay here. And so, rather than having that be an annual question, I just opted out and looked for something local where I could pour my skill set into, and ended up at the city of Laverne.
So why not go out and do, say, HR for another private sector corporation in the Nashville greater metroplex as opposed to going in the public sector? What was that transition like?
So, certainly an option. In the time that I had been pursuing my master's, I did a wide variety of different things. One of the roles that I did in that time period was I worked for the city of Brentwood, Tennessee, as a dispatcher. If you look at my resume, you you go, this all makes sense. And then what's this?
A dispatcher, huh?
Yeah. But again, I loved the team. I loved the whole atmosphere in communications. That's a really tough job to make enough money to raise a family at the time period that we were in. And so as I finished my master's degree and Amazon recruited me, that was that transition away from the city of Brentwood. So that was my first sort of public sector taste of what that season was like and what that arena is like. So when I started to look for a role, I actually started by looking at various cities around me that were hiring HR directors at the time. There were actually 3. And of course, in that season, much like other people who might be listening to the podcast who want to look for HR jobs around the country, you might end up putting in 200 or more resumes to get one phone call.
Yeah.
It's just a really, really tough market, not to find jobs, but to land them. And so I went where people wanted me or were interested in my skill set, and that's where Laverne showed up.
Well, it also seems, I mean, I don't know. I think there might be a pretty heavy bias, and maybe I'm speaking out of turn here, in the public sector when it comes to, it's kind of hard to get in at the HR director level from the private sector. It seems to be something that you kind of grow into from the public sector up into the position. So I think that has some challenges as well.
Yeah, I don't think you're wrong in saying that. I would say in Laverne, there has definitely been in the last 4 years a move at the director level to include private sector folks. I think that one of the things that's challenging from my experience in municipality work is that feeling of this is government work, I'm always going to have a job. And while that may be true and some of those ideas may play out to be beneficial for some people, I think when you bring in an outsider with a history of private sector work, you end up bringing in a whole new plethora of ideas that could be implemented that maybe somebody who has spent a lifetime in municipality work may not have ever been exposed to, if that makes sense.
Oh, absolutely, 100%. And you know that I have a non-traditional entrance into the city management profession. So I totally, honestly, Andrew, it's one of the reasons why you're on the podcast is because I want to actually delve into some of that private sector influence on your career path in the public sector. Quick little sidebar. My wife loves Brentwood, as you know, and I'll share for the audience. We met back in September for the first time in person because my wife and I wanted to explore Nashville as a possible relocation point or area for us. She loves Franklin, which is, you know, who doesn't love Franklin, right? Tennessee.
That's right.
But we love that whole area. And so when we were exploring the idea of going out to Nashville, that's when you and I started connecting and talking in more earnest. You'd already been a founding member of the American Association of Municipal Executives under the aspiring city manager tier. And I reached out to you and we started talking. And then you shared with me some of your journey, like what we already kind of unpacked here a little bit. And so that's sort of how we kind of really got into each other's radars. One of the things that really kind of stood out to me was that you came in from the private sector. And before we get into the innovation standpoint, I want to talk about just your approach to learning the profession and inculcating yourself within the ethos, so to speak, of the public sector sphere in the Nashville Metroplex. because you did something that wasn't groundbreaking or earth-shattering since it's never been done before, but what it pointed out to me was this initiative, and it was a 20-mile, you called it 20-mile club or something like that. Why don't you unpack that a little bit for the audience? Because I think this is something that, even though you did it in an HR context, that literally anybody who's in the public sector, especially at the department head level, should really can replicate in their own way in their own area.
Yeah. Here's how this group came about. I was actually sitting at a seminar and I had lost focus on the keynote that day, right? Like we all attend seminars at times, right? And we're like, this isn't for me. And so rather than just getting up and leaving, I grabbed my notebook and I started to jot down some ideas for future leadership training, which is something that I've developed at the city. And in there, I started to write down towns or cities that were within 20 miles of the city of Laverne. So if you just take a circle around Laverne, you have Lebanon, Mount Juliet, Nashville, Brentwood, Franklin, Murfreesboro, and a whole host of others. And at the time, Joe, I thought to myself, I don't know any of these people. Is it going to be more beneficial if I just start sending emails? Or will they treat emails sometimes like I treat them, which is a nuisance because I've got to get through the rest of my day? And so I had our PIO at the city who does some graphic work. I said, hey, I have this idea of a group I think I want to call the 20-mile group. Can you design me a logo? This is how this started. So I thought if I'm going to email people, I needed to look professional. And so I sent a mass email out, just simply going to each individual website and finding the HR folks. And then
Because you're not plugged in. You don't know these people. You're an
I'm not plugged
outsider.
in.
Yeah.
That's
So you're
absolutely right.
Yeah.
And so I sent this mass email out, and this was June of 23 was our first meeting. So this would have sometime been in the spring. And my email said something like, here's who I am. I don't know anybody. I could use some support. I feel at times like I'm on an island trying to learn this skill set, which is unique in municipality world. Would you be interested in getting together for a lunch? And in June of 23, I had 14 people show up for lunch in Laverne. And it was a wonderful lunch. Now, it was wonderful for a couple of reasons. One, and this may preview maybe something that you'll talk about, but I was in a very, very challenging season in my role as HR director in Laverne in June of 23.
We'll just say, hey, folks, if you don't know, Andrew was in the midst of an issue that literally made international news. You may have even had some memes sent to you via text about what was going on in Laverne. We'll just leave it at that, right? Because you can't talk about anything related to that story, correct, Andrew?
Yeah, I can't talk about anything at this point, but this is the season I was in. And so I really desperately needed to look at the eyeballs of other municipality HR people and say, help, like what's happening? And so 14 of us got together in June of 23. Fast forward a year to when you joined us in the late summer, early fall of this year, and we had almost 30 people at our lunch. We will get together in December of 24 and we'll have almost 50.
Shout out to Gallatin, who hosted the
Absolutely.
HR, the 20-mile club when I was there.
So here's what I found. People desperately desire connection, number one. Number two, HR leaders rarely have someone else to talk to.
Because everything they do is so confidential, right? And like they can't, I mean, what do you do, right?
That's right. That's right. I also think city managers have very little people to talk to. I think those two professions are almost identical with the desire for connection and the inability to find people who they can talk to about confidential things or topics and receive feedback from.
And it should not take a rocket scientist from anyone who's listening right now to see the parallels between what you did with the 20-mile club and what I wanted to do with the American Association of Municipal Executives. And while your story resonated with me deeply and how we connected over that.
Absolutely. And so as we grew from quarter to quarter on all of our meetings, people from outside of 20 Mile kept showing up. And at the last meeting, they said, we might need to name this the 20 plus mile group. And I said, the original idea, and anyone listening to this podcast, please steal this and replicate it. The idea was all over America, if people just connected with leaders within 20 miles, you are dealing with the same citizen, the same kind of issues, the same demographics generally the same financial scopes, the things you're going through, they're going through, and you need each other.
That's
And
right.
so there's no reason why 20 Mile Group couldn't be replicated into the thousands of different groups, all having intimate connections on topics relevant to municipality government work.
And here's the thing, Andrew, you created this group for the express purpose of helping yourself get better acclimated to the environment of public sector HR, to make connections, meet people. It was a quote unquote selfish pursuit. And I mean that in an altruistic sort of way, right? You're trying to help yourself become a better HR director. You're taking the initiative to create these relationships, but you also wanted to help other people by virtue of getting together and basically crowdsourcing information. And what I think is interesting about this dynamic is when we talk about the power of connection, and you said, hey, like, I just wanted this to actually be something that was replicated all across the country because you think everyone else can benefit from these types of relationships and these interactions. But what's happened is you've had this sort of perverse sort of what's the word I'm looking for? It's sort of spread out and mutated into, now it's almost like Andrew Patton is sort of like the HR leader of the whole Nashville Metroplex, right? I mean, it's like, I mean, for better
Well,
or worse.
that sounds very grandiose. But yes, you're right. It was a selfish endeavor to start because I simply needed people.
Right.
And what I found is other people needed people. And so we get together quarterly. We talk about topics.
Well, now Andrew's like, no, we're good, Andrew. You could just we'll just be the 30, 40, 50 mile HR
They do.
group.
They do. They just keep saying, Andrew, what's next? And we'll be happy to host, but will you lead our conversations and will you please get people here? And it's a beautiful thing, and it's been so helpful for me. And you got to see it firsthand. You got to see the tone and texture of our conversations. And, we try to talk about topics that are really relevant that we can all have takeaways from.
Yeah, it's a great group of people. Great group of people. And I think it's, if you are listening to this podcast right now, you're an HR director, public works, even a city manager, obviously they have their groups too. There's something special about being able to create this in-person dynamic or connection so that when you know that if you have an email or you need to make a call and get a hold of somebody, someone's going to respond to you because you built these relationships. Like, you're not alone in that
That's
regard.
right. Yeah. And everything we do, for the most part, is open record, especially in Tennessee, which has a very broad open records law. But it's super nice to be able to grab an email or pick up the phone to a colleague in the 20 Mile Group and say, hey, where are you at with this policy? What are you guys doing compensation wise? And we share all of that information because A, it's public anyway, and B, it enables us to understand what our neighbors are doing so we can be competitive with them or on the same wavelength for new initiatives or innovative policies that we may or may not develop.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You guys are meeting on a quarterly basis in person?
Quarterly basis. Yep.
So, Andrew, I've been doing this podcast, I've been doing LinkedIn, AAME, and my journey has created so many opportunities and connections and just things that have come before me that I never even would have guessed in a million years that would have provided all these different sort of ancillary benefits or value. And when you sought to do the 20 Mile Club, obviously you had a stated purpose. But since that period of time you've been doing it, I would imagine other opportunities or things that you never even possibly comprehended would be a benefit or add value to you. What are some of those things that you sort of realized or benefited from that you just had no clue would even arise as a result of starting this group?
So, one of the first things that comes to mind with that question is I've been invited by other cities to help sit on hiring panels for various positions. That not only is good for the city of Laverne, but it's also hopefully helpful for the cities of the panels that I sit on. Conversely, I have also asked for people to assist. We did a national search for a new police chief in Laverne this last year. And because of some of those relationships that were built through conversation and just camaraderie, I was able to find great connections at other cities to help me with the police chief search. There's also a wonderful organization in Tennessee called MTAS. It's the Municipal Technical Assistance Service. It's a group that's out of the University of Tennessee out of Knoxville, and they provide support for all municipalities. There's also a group that provides support for county governments as well. But through that service, I've been able to plug into various leadership roles and opportunities for growth. One of the things that I discovered through our MTAS rep that came to a 20-mile group was a program called CMFO, which is the Certified Municipal Finance Officer. So at this point, you're listening to me going, wait a minute. So entertainment, Amazon, dispatcher, now you're in HR. Why are you talking to me about finance? Well, one of my desires is to never sort of be satisfied with the ending of learning. Like I'm
Yeah,
always
it's a
wanting to
journey.
try to grow. It is a journey. And
Yeah.
so MTAS introduced me to the CMFO program, which predominantly is a certification program in the state of Tennessee that finance directors, CFOs in various counties and municipalities can get. So I decided, well, why don't I embark on a 11-month journey to get this certification? And in my particular class of about 50 people, I was the only HR director in the class. It was all mayors, city managers, assistant city managers, and finance directors.
That doesn't
And
surprise me, actually.
once again, they looked and like, hey, why are you here? Right. And I'm like, well, I don't know anything about accounting. I want to learn because I want to do and be the best impact I can in my role in Laverne. And I also want to prepare myself for what may be ahead in the future. And so, one of the things that I cherish is the certificate that hangs on my wall with, number 98 CMFO certified in the state of Tennessee. And I'll take great pride in that, right? Because it was a difficult journey for someone who's never worked in the accounting and finance world, but it gave me a greater understanding of how municipality financials work. And to circle back, Joe, to the 20-mile group, we have had numerous conversations among HR directors with information that came out of the CMFO group because a lot of those people don't have visibility to that. So I've been able to say, hey, some of your budgets work this way because of how things are structured. Here are some ideas of how you can partner with some of the other directors to have a more positive impact, not only financially, but also on your citizens.
That's fascinating. And not to toot AAME's horn, but I say this time and time again, the founding members of the AAME tend to be some of the more innovative, proactive individuals in the profession. And you are a perfect example of that. Congratulations. I didn't realize that you were in the top 100 when it came to, or the first 100 when it came to getting certified with that. That's pretty cool.
Thank you.
Let's pivot a little bit more towards the impact you brought to Laverne as the HR director and kind of like that private sector Amazon experience, bringing it to Laverne. Because when you got to Laverne, and I don't know who your predecessor was, and I don't want to throw anybody under the bus, but you guys were really behind the times. Is that fair to say in Laverne?
Well, I think any transition from the number one tech company to municipality government's going to be a little bit slower. But yes, I would say that what I encountered when I first came was a city that's their systems for HR processing, HRIS systems, it was entirely manual. Now, think about everything that you might do in your daily operation, timekeeping, record keeping, onboarding, all of those things, having it be entirely manual. I immediately thought, this is not sustainable. Like, how
Did you feel like you're back in 1999 again, but just as back?
I did. I think the first thing I did is go to Staples and buy a bunch of pencils because I was like, clearly, I think I might need them again. So I immediately started talking to administration about the idea of modernizing our HR systems. In December of 23, we launched a full service HRIS platform called Dayforce within the city. And much like anything, if you're listening to this podcast, regardless of what your title is at your city, all employees push back on change.
Absolutely.
Why are we changing, Andrew? It's working perfectly fine.
Right. That's a human condition.
And so we pushed through. There was a lot of conversation in launching this program that says, I hear you. I hear that you're scared about where we're going. However, we are moving this direction. So we need you to get on board. And that's supervisors, managers, all the way down to frontline employees. Now we're about a year out from the launch of that. And for the most part, it's smooth sailing. All of our officials at all of our departments, and our frontline workers have all figured out how to check into a time clock as opposed to writing their time on a piece of paper. Our onboarding and hiring practices have been completely changed using Dayforce. But also, one of the things that I did when I came to the city is, when you enter into a new job, you should spend time listening and watching before changing. Leaders who come in and immediately change are going to be short tenured leaders. So once I listened and I watched, I realized that our onboarding was not providing the best experience for a new employee and maybe a first time government sector employee. So, to be cheesy, we came up with an idea that we call Huddle, and it is a football themed onboarding plan where new employees spend not 2 hours in the conference room running through all the harassment policies and the handbook, and here's your direct deposit, and now go forth and prosper. We spend an entire day together talking and learning our systems. We have a meet and greet with their direct supervisor. We call them buddies on that day. So you are assigned a buddy for the week. You go to lunch with your entire team. You come back and do some required training so that we can kind of get those done. And then by day 2, you have met the people you worked with. You have toured your building. You have been, if you work in a department that has uniforms, you've been fitted for your uniforms so they can be ordered. We have gotten so much positive accolades from new hires who have said, like, this is the best onboarding. And that's not to toot our horn as much as to say we're trying to create an experience for people that they not only can feel welcomed at the city of Laverne, but also that they'll stay. Because as you know, hiring is difficult. Retention's even harder.
Yeah, yeah, for
So
sure.
anything that we do to make you feel more of a team member early on raises the opportunity for retention. And so those are some of the programs that I instituted and changed, but certainly moving all functions of payroll, onboarding, record keeping from a manual process to digital was one of the major first tasks that I did.
I don't want to sound trite and oversimplify it because I think being connected and feeling connection is more than just a one day exercise, obviously. But I couldn't help but hear when you're talking about your onboarding process that not only were you going through the sort of routine checklist of things that you have to accomplish on a normal onboarding experience, but you were housing it in an environment of where people are feeling more connected and plugged into the people that they're working with, as opposed to just sort of chattel being moved through the process, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the keys to that is realizing that your HR team is solely responsible for those onboarding tasks. And so we put some parameters around that process so that our team members aren't getting burned out too quickly. So we transitioned the thought of, rather than we just onboard somebody on any given day at any given moment, we do
You batch
onboarding.
them, right? You're batching
We
it.
batch them. We
There
batch
you
them
go.
every 2 weeks. Every 2 weeks, we have a huddle day. And so our supervisors know now, and they're now asking me those questions like, hey, when's our next huddle? So they know how to plan for their hiring as well. And that helps our team be able to accomplish all the other things that we do besides hiring.
And now, kind of going back to circle back to the 20 mile group, how much of the stuff that you're working on in Laverne are you actually taking to the 20 mile group either before implementation or post implementation, either to get some guidance or feedback on what you're planning to do or a debrief afterwards?
I think it's probably a both and. We're doing a lot of those things in person at our meetings. We also have an email group that is very active on a weekly basis with various questions. Onboarding and hiring processes are usually very specific to the municipality and how their culture works. But I would say one of the greatest wins we've had with the collaboration that you're talking about is on compensation. So, in the last, say, 2 years, there's been a really strong move upwards related to compensation. And that has been the topic at least two, if not three, of our quarterly luncheons where we've talked about compensation models, How are you implementing those as you prepare for budget season? When you go to your board of aldermen or your commissioners, how are you pitching this related to the funds that are available? How do you effectively communicate the needs of the market versus the budget? And Joe, I'll give you this example. We had a conversation in Laverne in probably late 22, early 23 related to our laborers, right? So in Laverne, we have laborers in parks and rec and maintenance and public works, as I'm sure many do. And I asked the question to our leaders, who do you think we're competing with for those employees? And after, a number of moments of silence, I said, well, I'll let you know. We're competing with FedEx, UPS, Amazon, any fulfillment distribution center. And quite honestly, as the fast food restaurant industry changed compensation, we're competing there. We can no longer pay our laborers $14, $15 an hour when they can go right down the street to a fast food restaurant and make $19 or $20 an hour.
Yeah, yeah.
And you could see the eyes open, right? And again, I think that's not a fault to those leaders. It's just they get very focused on the tasks they're assigned so that the citizens have the best, whatever, parks, streets, sewer, whatever that may be. And those kinds of conversations, both that we have internally and within our 20-mile group, those are bar raising conversations for government, period.
Yeah. Andrew, I think oftentimes we find ourselves in this profession. When I say public sector, it's very easy for us to get so lasered in on the to-do list of the things that in and out that you have to get done, the checklist of obligations and responsibilities, that oftentimes you don't have the luxury or even the time or energy to step back and really look at the big picture, right? The 30,000 foot level of what's going on outside the whole profession or industry that's changing, in this case, HR and personnel and hiring and what have you.
Yeah, but here's the challenge I would give. By not finding opportunities to do that, you are behind the eight ball.
Correct.
You're on the losing category.
And you're reacting instead of being proactive.
That's exactly right. And so maybe that's a private sector idea coming to the public sector. Maybe it's personality based for the leader. But if we want to grow and develop employees to provide world-class services to the people that live in our towns, as working directors, we have to both accomplish the tasks in front of us and plan for the future. And that means being engaged and interactive with what's happening in the marketplace around us. To me, that doesn't seem revolutionary, but sometimes conversations with partners around the area, that feels like, oh gosh, I never thought about the fact that we compete here, or that a service that's provided in this town may be one that we should look at. Like we get so siloed in what we do that we miss collaboration.
I agree 100%. I don't want to dump on the public sector, but I do think that in the private sector, one of the hallmarks is being more receptive to change. I'm not saying that change goes over well in the private sector either, because human beings are human beings, but you have to be more proactive in the private sector, generally speaking, and especially if you're working with a company like Amazon or the tech companies where 5 years ago is historic. Like, I mean, that's just like, you don't even, it's like not even the same ballpark of what you're dealing with today. And so I think there is a general predisposition in the private sector to be more proactive. And I also think there's a personality based element as well. But then I want to kind of shift gears a little bit, but kind of stay on the same topic here. Because in the public sector and in HR, what about being risk averse, right? Because a lot of times, HR is trying to mitigate risk, it's trying to mitigate liability, right? So it can be very cautious, it can be very careful and deliberate. That can be translated to be slow, right? Or resistant to change itself. So, how do you navigate those waters as an HR director in an environment where you are trying to and essentially play it safe to a degree or protect the city, right? And
Mhm.
yet you're trying to bring about change at the same time. That's risk. That's an interesting tightrope to walk in the HR department.
Yeah, so now welcome to the second hat that I wear, which is risk manager for the city.
There you go. Yeah.
So, yes, it's there again, it's a both and. So, you're absolutely right. Part of my job is to protect, eliminate risk, whether that be liability risk, whether that be property risk, workers' comp risks, all of those things. So often, I'm the guy showing up at an employee event or a community event going, guys, this looks great. Can we please cover those cords? Can we please fix this trip hazard? Why is this not happening? Where's your vest? Where's those cones that should be behind your lift truck? And yep, I get the eye rolls. I get it's going to be fine, but I'm not doing my job if I don't at least bring that to the table. One of the things on the risk side that we instituted, and I actually got it from the city of Cookeville, which is a little outside of our 20-mile radius of Laverne. They had an accident review program. So every accident that happened in the city of Cookeville was reviewed by an internal team of employees that evaluated whether those accidents were preventable or unpreventable, and then had consequences associated with that. We got to a place in Laverne where we were seeing an increased number of preventable traffic accidents. And certainly, the first thing that comes to mind when you think of driving in a municipality sector, you think of police. The majority of our police force are driving all the time.
Right. Definitely in riskier propositions when it comes to chasing after individuals or whatnot. Nighttime driving, right?
That's right. You've got pursuits, you've got nighttime, you've got all the things. And so I was tasked with sort of an evaluation, both by our insurance provider and administration, along with conjunction with the police chief, to say, okay, let's take a look at what the behavior patterns are that are maybe creating some risk. And much to our surprise, and this may be true when you hear it or your listeners hear it, our accidents were not coming by pursuits or stationary work. We were hitting things that don't move, or ourselves, or, just those things that are careless or you take for granted, right? And so we instituted Cookeville's Accident Review Board. And we have been reviewing all accidents within the city for about a year and a half period, maybe almost 2 years at this point, and our accidents are reducing.
Did you do only looking forward at that point in time when you implemented the program, or did you have a look back at all?
We started with the look back, so we knew what our issues were, right? So in developing the consequences for preventable accidents, Cookeville had a model. We started with that model, and then when our new chief came in and was so influential in helping to shift some of those behavior patterns, he wanted honestly, some higher level consequences for that particular department. And so we shifted some of those things, not on the structure of the review, right? Because we wanted to take out the subjectivity of the review and just have it be very objective. What
Right.
happened? So we looked back for knowing where we were, but then all reviews, we just simply moved forward. In 2024, I'm thrilled to tell you things that I've told our team. We had 3 months this year that I canceled the accident review board because we weren't reviewing any accidents from that previous month.
Well, that's awesome.
That's incredible.
Let me ask you this though, Andrew. So
Yeah.
it's one thing to review an accident, it's one thing to have a systematic review, but unless you can distill that information in some way to your team, how do you expect to get a result or a change in behavior? So what have you guys done beyond just a review in order to elicit that change in behavior? What's the distribution or mechanism that you're doing?
Yeah. So, two things. One, on the individual behavior, when the consequences are more severe, that tends to have a greater impact on your choice the next time.
Right.
Right. So there was naturally that progression. And then on the department overall side, we have seen policy and procedure changes. If you take a look at police, there's a different response plan now based on some accidents that happened, responding to calls that maybe didn't need that type of response. And so there's a different plan put in place. In our fire department, we have done a better job at implementing spotters for ladders or pumpers that are just large, and people needed to not assume that I've driven in these fire doors a million times. I know where it is. Spotters help with that, right? So
Right.
it's little things that from a policy procedure perspective have a real positive impact. It's a financial impact, Joe, because we pay less in insurance. We have more money to spend on salaries, or citizen activities.
Right, right, right. So the results of this analysis are essentially being codified in many ways through either a disciplinary action and or a policy change, which then when that policy is changing, there's a communication obviously of why that policy is being changed, and therefore it's the department or the individuals are being educated as a result of that, essentially.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're there to support those directors as they institute those changes within their departments.
So this is going to segue into the classic, employee handbook, right? I think you have some
Yeah.
thoughts on that. But I mean, it looks like every city has an employee handbook that's how many pages, right? Because you have to cover every permutation or every sort of possible action that might occur. What are your thoughts on the government's employee handbook that sort of sits on the shelf and usually only gets read after something bad happens and someone's trying to figure out whether or not they deserve to be punished or they should be punished or if they're somehow should be protected from being punished?
So true. Get your bowl of popcorn. Let's talk about this. So that was actually the very first task that the city administrator gave me when I came to the city. He said, "Would you please finish the employee handbook? We've been trying to update it for 3 years, and I haven't been able to get the HR team to finish it." So we finished it, of course, in record time and to get it approved within 3 months. That is a living, breathing document. If you, as an HR leader, city manager, are not reviewing your handbook regularly, you've missed the mark. It's a living, breathing document. So, yes, at the time you write it or you change a policy, you think you have it right. 6 months from now, you're going to find something that needs to be tweaked, or federally, a guideline will change or be enhanced, and you need to be right there with it. Our handbook, we provide a physical copy to all new hires. Then we have it on our employee information portal that our employees can have access to at any point. It's very comprehensive. We try to hit all major topics. What we cannot do is kind of what you hinted at in your question is we cannot address every single question or behavior, but you do try to handle all of the big topics. What I like to say is the employee handbook should be understandable to your employees, which means not to throw city attorneys under the bus because I love ours. But if your handbook reads like an attorney textbook, your employees are not going to understand it. So write it in such a way that's understandable at every level, whether it's a laborer in the Parks and Rec department to somebody in codes to the director of engineering, right? Like it's got to be easy to understand and write it in such a way that attempts to eliminate the follow-up question. So what do I mean by that? If your policy says XYZ and your employees are naturally going to come to say, okay, well, but if I do X, then what happens? But what if I do Z? What happens? Like you want to be able to empower the employees to know if this happens, then that. And so we've put a lot of work into our handbook to allow the employees both to understand what we value in our culture from a safety risk standpoint, and also equally what we value from an employee engagement standpoint. Often in HR, and the employee handbook is probably a great example, we are deemed just the fun cops. We shut everything down. We say no to everything. But the reality is, yes, that's a part of our job, but it's a small part compared to the work that we do to try to enhance our employee engagement and experience and also keep our employees safe. So I was talking recently to a smaller city in Tennessee whose handbook is 25 pages. And that HR leader looked at me like, please help. Like, I don't know what to do. And so that's a great example, again, because everything's open. I can say, hey, here's our handbook. Here it is in a Word doc. Like, feel free to take anything that you think is beneficial to you. It enables you to maybe spend less time creating the wording for something, copy paste. I don't know who wrote the original employee handbook. Somebody did generations ago, and we've all been copying and pasting it since then. But it needs to be relevant to your workforce. It needs to be relevant to the timing that you write it, and it needs to be easily understandable for sure.
Yeah, that's always an interesting, vexing challenge with the employee handbook, Andrew, because at some point in time, I'm not sure when it was, it became almost like a document where arguing a case before an attorney for to have a defense attorney, right? Like, did it expressly forbid this? Then I'm safe, right? It's like it's almost, and I guess it depends on what city or state you're in with the different types of bargaining units and other things that go into the mix when it comes to disciplining personnel and so forth and so on. But yeah, it's frustrating because oftentimes, how should I say this? I think oftentimes the employee handbook should be written in such a way that gives the employer latitude to make decisions, and I think oftentimes it's become more of a hindrance to that, depending on what jurisdiction you're in and how legalese or how it's written, right?
Well, you're exactly right. And I would say I view it as a benefit, some may not. But in Tennessee, we don't have collective bargaining agreements, we don't have unions. So we have the ability to craft language that's hopefully beneficial to the city, protects the city, and beneficial to our employees as well.
Yeah, absolutely fair enough. I kind of wanted to touch on something here as we head towards the finish line on this interview, and that is you joined the American Association of Municipal Executives as an aspiring executive member, founding member, as I mentioned earlier in the podcast. And I think, and I don't want to offend anybody else if I'm overlooking anyone, but I think you might be the only HR director who's a member of the group as a founding member. And I'm kind of curious, like, what was the impetus for you wanting to join and be a member of the AME?
So we've talked a lot about what we've done with the 20-mile group, and I'm going to steal your line that you said that it was sort of a selfish start because it was to meet people and to learn. I listen to your podcast, and I am very active and interested in AI and the use of AI in government space. And Micah's been a huge friend and component to me learning in that area. So I heard about AAME and wanted to jump on board for two reasons. One, I love supporting new, innovative ideas. I think competition in any marketplace is healthy, and as I have been able to, in the last 3 or 4 years, get connected not only to HR organizations within the state of Tennessee and nationally, I've also had a great opportunity to connect with the TCMA, which is the Tennessee Management Association for City Managers, TML, which is our municipal league. I've just found myself in places for not only exposure, but also growth and learning, and I love my job and what I'm doing. And I have a goal in the future to transition to city management.
Awesome.
Some would say, "You've lost your mind, go back." But I think the reality is I'm just somebody who is excited about the ability to impact. And I think a city manager role for me would be that next step. And AAME and the community that you've built will help with that. My impact and organization within the state of Tennessee are helping with that. And so that's why I joined. I joined because I wanted to be in a community to where I see myself in the future. And that seemed like a natural path. Being, if it's true, being the only HR guy in the group sounds great. Let's have all the conversations. Feel free to reach out. We can talk, but it doesn't scare me to be the only one, and connecting with you and others on the AEME chat channel has been exceptionally valuable so far to me. So that's part of the reason of why I jumped in early.
Awesome. Shout out to your city manager of Laverne, Bruce Richardson. He's been one of those city managers that has supported you in your journey. I think a lot of individuals sometimes, what's in the private sector or public sector, they run into situations where they might have a boss that they report to who they feel is not always looking out for their best interest, that might be siloing them off or limiting their potential. And it was nice to get to meet you and Bruce back in September. And obviously, he's aware of your journey and supporting it. And I just think that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, I absolutely would echo that. Bruce Richardson's our city administrator. Kyle Brown is our assistant city administrator. Both have been cheerleaders for me, both coming into the city and supporting changes and growth that we are currently implementing, and encouraging me personally in goals for the future. And you're right, that is a very unique space to live. And I'm grateful to have that opportunity to have that support.
Yeah, I think if you're a city manager and you have individuals underneath you who are performing well, who have shown talent, who have shown initiative, that you should be rewarding and encouraging them and trying to, whether it's mentor them, whether it's to give them some shine or a rub, as my buddy Brandon Dross likes to use in the wrestling parlance. You should be encouraging those who work underneath you who are exhibiting potential, because I think that's a great reflection not only on the organization but the city manager, the city administrator as well. Obviously, as you continue on with this journey, who knows where it's going to lead? That's obviously going to be a great representation upon your time in Laverne, whenever that may come to an end.
Well, I absolutely thank you for that. And I'm committed to always working hard for the employees that I support and in the public sector, the citizens that ultimately we all work for. And I'm excited for what's ahead, both for Laverne and for me personally, and for AAME. It's a good season of life to be in this space, and we've got more opportunities for impact. You, as a listener in your city, have more opportunities for impact now than you've ever had. Don't miss the moment to make a difference. Don't let tomorrow be what yesterday was, because yesterday's gone, right? So you've got to be moving your teams forward, because your cities are moving forward, your counties are moving forward, your citizens are looking for you to lead. This is your moment. Take it and lead.
Absolutely. Be proactive. Take control of your future. Take control of your career. I think too often individuals sit back and they wait for something to happen. And there's nothing wrong with being proactive and taking the initiative, whether it's starting a group like this. I mean, 20 Mile Group, and do something similar in your community. That would have huge dividends for you professionally. And I just think individuals need to be, just like I said, take more ownership over their career and say, hey, look, we only get one bite at the apple in this life, right? Do you want to make it happen for yourself, or do you want to put your fate or future in the hands of someone else? Clearly, you're taking control of your future and you're having great success, and having not only great success on an individual professional level, but also having great success when it comes to helping those around you become better versions of themselves as well through a group like 20 Mile Group.
Well, it's well said, and I'm very grateful for those comments. Thank you.
Awesome. Good deal. Hey, Andrew Patton, City of Laverne, HR Director. If you are a fan of the show, enjoy the content, please hit that like, subscribe button. Please leave a rating and review on your platform of choice. I am Joe Turner. This is the City Manager Unfiltered podcast. Thank you for listening. Catch you next week.